the meaning of life is literally to locally reverse entropy, to act as a catalyst for the inevitable heat death of the universe. That's what he says. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the show. Today, I'm talking about antifragility, which is a term coined by Nassim Taleb, and he wrote a book about it. Now, pre-warning, I haven't read the book, but this is an idea that I thought about, and with a few conversations with friends, and I'm not going to lie, a few conversations with I have got a few thoughts about it, and I've gone down a few rabbit holes about how we can appropriate antifragility to help us in life, in our work, how we can live better by design using antifragility, some critiques of it, but also how it relates to physics and science and nature, but also how it relates to Naval Ravikant's one of his theories on what is the meaning of life. So there's a lot there. There's also a little bit of like Peter Thiel and his 0 to 1 philosophy in there. So I really went down a rabbit hole. I literally lost sleep trying to read up for this episode because I found it so interesting, and I hope you do as well. So to kick off, to begin, I suppose it would be useful to define the difference between surviving and actually improving from stress, which is what antifragility talks about. So if something is fragile, say that I'm in the UK, say that I send something over to Australia and I put fragile on the box, that's to say, treat it carefully because any shock or any sudden shock and it will completely break, right? So that's fragile. And the opposite of fragile, we might consider as being robust. So if something's robust, it means it can withstand shock. But Taleb takes it one step further and talks about antifragile, which is things that actually improve as a result of shock, stress, disorder, volatility, these kinds of things. So if we take fragile items have an upper limit of unharmed, i.e., imagine glassware. The upper limit of the glassware is it stays the same and it's unharmed, there's no shock. Whereas anti-fragile items have an upper limit of improvement and an upper limit of improvement from shock. So an analogy for this is going to the gym. This is like the classic analogy that Taleb uses. Going to the gym, you need to break muscle to make muscle. So the stress or the damage leads to the improvement of strength. The same thing happens when it comes to cardio as well. You need to run, you need to break the body down to then create new capillaries. I'm pretty sure that part of cardio training is you literally create new capillary networks so your body runs more efficiently. So another example, just to really drive home the idea, is in fashion. A great pair of jeans aren't only robust, i.e. they stand the test of time, but a great pair of jeans actually get better with age. So the tests of time, that stress, actually makes the jeans themselves better. I was throwing around the idea of kintsugi, which is the Japanese art of breaking ceramic pottery and then mending it together with like gold adhesive, and it looks beautiful afterwards. It's quite similar to anti-fragile, but it's not the same because for kintsugi to work, the item doesn't automatically put itself together. It requires a designer or anyone really to put it back together, to mend it. So you're locally reversing the entropy. More on that later, but you're actively doing it. Whereas something like a great pair of jeans or a great pair of trainers, actually. So when I was younger, when I was a teenager, I was a little bit of a sneakerhead and I'd buy trainers and I wanted to covet them. I'd never wear them. And if I did wear them, I'd be walking really carefully to make sure that I don't crease them. And actually, those trainers are super fragile. There's a lot of talk about how Air Force Ones have become super fragile because the quality's gone down so much. So with the white ones, if you have a pair of white Air Force Ones and they get creased, it's a wrap. You can't really wear them anymore. But if you have a pair of beaters, which is a pair of trainers that you feel comfortable wearing out and about, They can get muddy, they can get dirty, they can go through all kinds of weather, and you still want to wear them. Or if they look better after they've been worn, you can maybe refer to those kinds of trainers as anti-fragile. So, like a pair of Doc Martens, they stand the test of time and they look fine when you first buy them, but they look even better once they've been worn a little bit. This is the idea that we're going with. And I think this is something that we can bring into our lives in the easiest way is like a mindset shift, or the simplest way, not necessarily the easiest way. So we hear a lot about this growth mindset. You know, if you've watched or consumed Huberman, I read it in Sahil Bloom's book, but everyone talks about it in terms of developing self-development, this growth mindset. So to be anti-fragile requires adopting this kind of growth mindset, which is grounded in the belief that humans are malleable and that we can change, and we can change for the better or we can change for the worse. And it forces us to reckon with the idea that we're in control of that change, which pushes us towards a kind of sincere effort to change in the way that we want to change. So Sahil Bloom has said that those with a focus on effort seek out challenging tasks as new learning opportunities, whereas those who have been praised for fixed intelligence subsequently avoid them. This is referencing an actual study, an actual like kind of experiment, social experiment. So people who, as a kid, were praised for their intelligence or for doing well at school or something, would avoid challenges going forward. But those who seek out challenges as new opportunities kind of grow. This is also, Angela Duckworth has written about it in her book Grit, which is a great book. So one might argue that if someone has been praised as a kid for like natural intelligence, in inverted commas, then these kids will grow up to be super fragile because they haven't had the challenges, they haven't had to overcome challenges, and they, as a result, won't get better as a result of those challenges. Whereas kids who have been challenged in their youth and have overcome those challenges will be more resilient and will grow from those challenges. As a result, we can call them anti-fragile. So this is an idea, when I was reading about this, one person in particular came to mind, and it's Maya Jama. And I think she did a TED talk about this, but she more recently was interviewed in The Guardian by Simon Hattenstone. And she talks about adversity, and she talks about how adversity isn't just a test, it's a process where we like forge ourselves. This is a quote: adversity affects you one way or another. It could completely ruin your life, or you get this weird sense of resilience. And this, Maya Jama says, makes you want to achieve everything you can because life can change in any second. She's been very open about how her boyfriend, when she was much younger, was shot, and that really drove her to reconcile with the fact that kind of life is short and you need to go after what you want. And she was grieving her boyfriend, but also, I think I'm right in saying this, I don't want to put words in her mouth, but I think I'm right in saying that it really crystallized reality for her, and it pushed her to have the work rate that she does now. Uh, Arthur Bloom applies this same kind of idea to relationships. So just as the muscle becomes stronger after being tested, so will your most durable relationships. A relationship that has never been tested is built on kind of weak foundations, because when you do get tested, is it just going to fall apart? Are you resting on the fact that you avoid issues? Are you resting on the fact that you don't have any issues? Because if one thing's for sure, it's that life is going to get more chaotic and issues are going to arise. And in the context of a relationship, Bloom is arguing, how can you guarantee that you'll be able to overcome that if you've never had to before? And I mentioned Naval earlier on. He's spoken about how you can treat minor annoyances in everyday life and shift your mindset towards them to have a possible gain. So he asks himself, what is the positive of this situation? If anything negative happens, he's like, what's the positive spin on it? And even if there isn't any positive, he has learned to accept that the universe is going to teach him something, and now he gets to listen and learn. And it's the whole we used to throw it around at school all the time. You don't lose, you learn. Take the L and turn that loss into a learning. We said it as a bit of a joke, but it's true. And it's like the seeds of a growth mindset. Instead of seeing things as defeat, instead of seeing challenges as things that can defeat you or things that you, oh, I need to overcome this, if we can see it as things that we get to overcome and we get to learn from, then that growth mindset is just making us more anti-fragile. And when the inevitable chaos of life happens, we are better faced to not only deal with it, but also thrive within it. I spoke about how I spoke a little bit about entropy earlier on, and I'll get into that in a second. But the reason that this mental shift is important is because of entropy and because of the second law of thermodynamics, which, as I said, I'll get into in a minute. But life, like the universe, is actually defined by disorder, and we're always trending towards disorder, really. So if we want our local remit, our life, to get stronger from that disorder, if we want to create our own kind of order from that disorder, we need to understand what I've been teasing this whole time, which is the universal law of disorder, which is entropy. So we can link the personal challenge of adversity to the cosmic challenge of the second law of thermodynamics. Okay, so there's the personal, there's like our own domain, and we deal with adversity in our own lives, but then there is this more cosmic story going on, which is written by the second law of thermodynamics. So the second law of thermodynamics, which is kind of entropy, it's kind of defined by entropy, says that the universe is always entropy in the universe is always going up. So entropy is a measure of disorder, and it's always going up. It's all all this concentrated energy. From that, useful energy spreads out, becomes diffuse, and it becomes unusable. The classic example is if you have a glass, right, and the glass is held in your hand, that is low entropy because every part of the glass needs to be in exactly that place for that glass to be. But if you break the glass, a broken glass there's a lot of different ways that the glass can be broken. You can have 1,000,000 shards or you can have 5. There are a lot of different ways that can happen. Infinite number of ways the glass can be broken, but there's only one way, there's only one arrangement of all of those different parts where the glass can be whole. And so the second law of thermodynamics talks about how entropy goes from very orderly, which is the glass, to very disorderly, which is a broken glass, and it can happen in any kind of way. And we can use this to describe the arrow of time. We know that the broken glass came after the formed glass because it's a lot easier and it makes a lot more sense, and it's only natural to go from whole to broken. But the odds of going from broken to back to whole again are negligible. It's just not going to happen. So we can also use the second law of thermodynamics to describe the arrow of time, to describe how A moves to B, but B can't move to A, for example. So entropy, the second law of thermodynamics, is essentially defining how low entropy energy, which is concentrated and useful energy like gasoline, like coal, like food, like a coiled spring, moves towards high entropy energy, which is diffuse and useless for our work. So, for example, like waste heat or smoke or lukewarm air, kind of byproducts that happen as we do things, as we generate things. We eat food for energy. This food is low entropy energy. It's very uniform. It's very orderly. We use that to move. And as we move, we put energy out into the world through heat, through waste, and that's high entropy. It diffuses, but it's useless for anything. So moving from low entropy to high entropy. But even though the high entropy energy diffuses, it's not chaos. It's a kind of uniformity and a cosmic stillness. It's like a serenity where there's no more work that can be done. When we we can try to retain the energy that we expel. We can try to retain the heat energy that we expel by moving, but it's very difficult to, and it's very useless. And this shows that we're always moving from low entropy energy to high entropy energy. And the idea of the heat death, in inverted commas, of the universe is that we are cosmically, as a universe, accelerating towards this cosmic stillness where there's no work that can be done. It's a state of maximum entropy. Okay, there's no coal that we can burn to create fuel anymore. All of it's gone. Everything's been used, and there's no energy that we can use to get to a higher entropic point. Right? We've reached maximum entropy. That's the idea. Naval's thesis behind all of this is that living systems, like humans, we locally reverse entropy. We create order in our own lives, and we do this by design. We are locally reversing entropy, but in order to do so, we must consume and dissipate this concentrated energy, and that globally accelerates entropy. Now, I'm getting very in the weeds here, but bear with me. I'd recommend reading on this as well, or having a conversation with your AI chatbot of choice to describe it. But we locally reverse entropy, and that globally accelerates it. And the acceleration is almost a paradoxical meaning of our complex existence. Naval says that the meaning of life is literally to locally reverse entropy, to act as a catalyst for the inevitable heat death of the universe. That's what he says. The main problem that we face, this is a problem that I thought about, it's probably been thought about before, is I was trying to reconcile the idea of, okay, if we're put on Earth to accelerate entropy, how can we, is that trying to act as a justification for the byproducts of the fuels that we use for creation, i.e., like fossil fuels, right? Are fossil fuels just a natural kind of byproduct, like collateral of what was going to happen anyway? And I did some research, and this is actually not the case. I think we can still reconcile the idea of we're meant to locally reverse entropy whilst also taking care of the planet. We just haven't quite figured it out yet. So, in short, if creation is our purpose, and let's just take Naval's rule as gospel for now. So if we can't escape the universal law of entropy, and that's the meaning of life and all this sort of stuff, how do we design our own lives, our careers, our projects, our goals, our lives, to feed the impulse, to feed the meaning of life that is creation, without succumbing to what are outdated energy models? And they're quite fragile. And I think the answer lies in this antifragile heuristic. So it comes back around. So the antifragile heuristic is to always prefer flow energy over stock energy. In the same way that you're not meant to drink from stagnant water, you're only meant to drink from like a river because it flows. We shouldn't be relying as heavily on stock energy like fossil fuels or these like fixed ideas that carry a harmful byproduct when we use them. Instead, we should, to use a metaphor, drink from running water. This is flow energy. This is solar, wind, or continuous learning or feedback loops, things that constantly progress, things that are constantly renewed. Right? This is a heuristic. And within all of this, we should try to design our lives to face resistance, because that helps us to become more anti-fragile. So the creation of things in the past and the creation of fossil fuels as a byproduct, we wouldn't have learned that fossil fuels are bad if we hadn't created them in the first place. So now we should pivot and move in a different direction. For example, that's one example. And one of the best books that I've read on being a creative in general is from Stephen Pressfield, the War of Art, The War of Art. And he speaks about how resistance, if we face resistance, we face internal resistance, it's because we're trying to move from a lower sphere to a higher sphere. It only happens when we're moving from a lower sphere to a higher sphere. So any difficulty that we face is probably a good thing. And this just feeds right back into this growth mindset. The difficulty that we face should move forward, move through it, because you don't lose, you learn, essentially. And you learn to move from a lower sphere to a higher sphere, right? But in doing so, especially when it comes to energy and this idea of entropy and locally reversing entropy, we should try to focus on energy flows, energy that flows rather than on stock energy. So learning is an important thing because learning always develops, it always grows, you always get more information. The conversation is constantly evolving. And when it comes to energy itself, we should choose more renewable energy that flows because it's more anti-fragile. Sorry, it's less fragile. If we continue to use fossil fuels and to kill the planet, then there won't be any fuel left for us to use, right? And that's pretty fragile. Whereas if we use anti-fragile means of fuel, that's a lot more sustainable, and we can do more with that. It's about future-proofing ourselves and the planet. So that was a whistle-stop tour of antifragility and the second law of thermodynamics and entropy and how it can kind of all tie together to an extent. The main takeaway is that the second law of thermodynamics says that disorder only increases. So disorder is guaranteed. Shocks and stresses are guaranteed. And we can either train ourselves to withstand those things, or we can train ourselves to get better from those things. Or we cannot train ourselves at all and let them defeat us. There are three options. We can be fragile and be defeated by these inevitable shocks. We can be robust and trudge through them. Or we can try to be anti-fragile and actually get better from them. Now, the idea, Taleb himself, he gets a lot of flack. There was a Reddit that was talking about anti-fragile, and it was talking about it as there is a Reddit subreddit specifically for books like these. It's essentially books that you'd find at the airport, which are quite nice, like chewing gum books. They're quite nice, they're quite easy to read, but actually they don't have any gravitas, they don't have any weight to them. I think that's quite unfair for Taleb. I actually think he's quite an intelligent bloke. He got criticized quite heavily by the New York Times for this book, as far as I'm aware. So take it with a pinch of salt. Take what I've been saying with a pinch of salt. I'd love to hear your opinions on it. But I think it's a fairly decent heuristic to be taken with a pinch of salt as to how we can move forward. And if one thing is for sure, in my opinion, is that a growth mindset is probably a good thing. So be that as it may, and given all that information, I have a few questions to finish this episode about how we might want to use this information to live more by design and to move through life more by design. So number one is a fuel check. Where in our lives right now are we relying on stock energy that will eventually run out or cause a harmful byproduct? And how can we shift to a flow source? You know, this can be harmful food, for example. Food that's obviously not good for you. Eating certain foods from certain brands can, one, have the harmful byproduct of making you unhealthy, making you gain weight, or just not giving you a lot of energy. But they can also be unsustainable. You know, the company can be engaging in activities that don't align with you, for example. So all of the different byproducts through that food, just as an example, is an example of a stock resource, a stock energy source, rather than a flow energy source. Something that can move through you, something that aligns with you, something that moves with you, right? And something that's more sustainable. Number two, the optionality test. What is one area of our career, our relationship, where we could intentionally introduce small, reversible failure to make the overall system stronger? This is about whatever it is, going to the gym and pushing a little bit harder each time, or pushing till failure every now and again to know where that limit is. You slowly push that boundary further up. I always refer to the gym because it's something that I do a fair amount. When I was running a lot, it would be trying to PR in a 5K or a 10K or something, just pushing that limit a bit further, you know? Alex Hormozy talks a lot about working in terms of like the duration of working. And he says it's amazing what you can get done if you just don't stop working. Like you literally sit down at the desk from whatever, 5 a.m. until 11 p.m. and you just work. And it's amazing what you can get done. See how long you can genuinely work for. Push the limits. Where is it that we can push the limits to make the overall system stronger, to make our overall lives stronger? And then this kind of like growth mindset audit. When a setback occurs, instead of reacting, can we ask ourselves what Naval asks himself? Something along the lines of, how can we ensure that this setback doesn't just make me resilient, but it actually makes my future self better off? What is it that we can learn? What's the universe trying to teach me from this setback? It can be really hard when we're all in the weeds of it, but we also need to have a system to get out of the weeds, to zoom out, to take a step back, and to assess whatever situation for what it is. I'm certainly not perfect at this, but to be honest, this has been largely a stream of consciousness to think about how I'm perceiving this whole anti-fragility thing and how I might want to employ it in my life. But what do you think of it? Do you think anti-fragility is just a complete hoax? Have you got anything from this? Do you know about this already? How are you employing this anti-fragility heuristic into your life? I'd love to know. But I thank you very much for listening or for watching if you're watching this. Thank you very much for the support as well. The last episode with Matt got a ton of positive feedback, so I really appreciate that as well. Appreciate you for listening to the podcast. And if you think anyone could get something from this, please send it to them, encourage them to watch the podcast and leave a review, follow wherever you're listening to this. I'd really, really appreciate it. And that is all of my asking done for now. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you on the next one.